August is Women's Month in South Africa, and today is, of course, National Women's Day. Normally, it's a time for celebration and to pay homage to the brave women of 1956 who marched to the Pretoria regime to confront the apartheid colonial government of the time. These women from all over the land demanded an end to the system of dehumanization and racial oppression. Today, almost 3 decades into democracy, the face of inequality is sadly still that of a black woman. So just how far have we really come in changing the lives of women? Joining me today to unpack this is the President of Labour Federation, COSATU, Zingiswa, the Executive Director of Business Leadership South Africa, Busi Mavuso, and feminist activist Fatima Shabuddin. Thank you so much for joining me on The Fix this morning. Let me start with you, Zingiswa, and ask you, why is it that in democratic South Africa, the face of inequality, of poverty, of joblessness is still that of a black woman? Has democratic South Africa failed South Africa's women?
Good morning, Karima and my fellow comrades, Comrade Busi and Fatima. And I must say, Happy Women's Day to the women of South Africa, Izimbokodo. In what you are raising is a very critical matter that is facing the women who are the majority of citizens in our country. And I agree with you that government has not made a dent, or at least brought a sustainable intervention on the eradication of poverty, which impacts 60% of South African women. And for me, just to get to the issue is that what we have seen is the lack of a political will to turn things around. Actually, COVID-19 has demonstrated that if government has a political will and indeed wants to put and change the lives of South Africans, in particular women, that can be done. We have seen how regulations came to effect. We have seen how quick regulations can be amended. And for us, it has said that when politicians want to change the lives of South Africans, that can happen.
Okay, I want to bring in the other participants quickly. Busi, Zingiswa is saying when there's political will, we can see change. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe, for example, spoke about the special courts we set up, to deal with corruption during the World Cup. Do you agree with Zingiswa Losi that there isn't political will to change the economic realities for the majority of women in South Africa?
Morning, Karima. I definitely agree with Zingiswa. I think that when we put our minds to it, as the leadership of the country, then things can move swiftly. And I think she makes a great example about how decisive and urgent the COVID situation was actually treated. And that is why you saw certain shifts that were actually required being implemented with great speed. So unless and until we actually deal with the issue of realizing, number one, that we have a crisis when it comes to the gender agenda, until we realize that there is an urgent need, for government to shift certain things when it comes to the gender agenda, then it's definitely not going to happen. I thought that the gender-based violence group did a brilliant demonstration last year when they marched to the JSE. But I think immediately after you saw what happened there, there's very little shifts that have happened in as far as that is concerned. So I think will is definitely what is required, Karima.
Okay, this is a perfect point to bring you in, Fatima. You and I were both at that march at the JSE, and the big question there was to demonstrate will by committing the necessary resources. From your perspective and where you're sitting, Fatima, as one of the leading organizers of that march, has there been that political will? Has resources actually been put aside to mainstream gender-based violence and to deal with the issues that women face on a daily basis?
Good morning, Karima. So from my side, not at all. We've not seen much shift happening since the JSE march, and we were very specific about choosing the JSE as the target point of our demonstration a year ago, because in our thinking it's very clear the existing economic model doesn't work for the majority of people in the country, and particularly doesn't work for black women. So part of our challenge is we've also got to step back and assess what our strategies have been. So for 25 years, we've been fighting to insert women into this economy. And this is the moment for us to recognize that that's not going to take us anywhere. The economy, the basic fundamental structure is flawed. It's premised on the exploitation of the most marginalized, and women we know occupy those spaces of marginality on the edges of society. So this is a moment, in this reset COVID moment, for us all to ask, what does a different economic structure look like? So it's not only lack of political will, it's also lack of political imagination in this moment, where we know that everything that we've done in the past hasn't worked.
Absolutely. Now, Zingiswa, you guys have been arguing this point for a very long time. You've asked for a different economic system, and there's been a particular push, for example, around a COVID-19 grant, but also a basic income grant. What is COSATU's view on the current measures that the government has laid out in terms of assisting businesses and workers in particular around working perhaps with reimagining the economy?
Indeed, we have supported government intervention. Some of the interventions that we have seen, it is through the engagements of also organized labor, business and government and civil society, community constituency at the level of NETLEC. But what we are seeing, of course, there are those that would say, indeed, we have managed to receive, but not everyone has been able to benefit from the interventions that we made. We were talking now, you had an interview before us with former President Kgalema Motlanthe dealing with issues of corruption, particularly during this time of COVID. So the resources that we have fought for hard to ensure that government puts together are the ones that have now we are seeing commissions that must be established and committees that must be established to deal with those resources that have not reached the intended recipients. And what it does is that it then entrenches the levels of inequality in our society. And those that are at the receiving end, as we are celebrating the Women's Day, are women in this country. They are losing employment. Sectors that have lost production, sectors that would not go back to the economy and operate, majority of those that are in those sectors are women. And the devastation of COVID-19 and the resources that have been allegedly misused and corrupted, those that are at the receiving end is the poorest of the poor, the women that always carry the burden.
Okay, let me bring in Busi here. Busi, you serve on Business Leadership South Africa. What has your organization done to ensure that the funds that have been made available, A, go to women-headed businesses, go to small businesses, and the sectors where you find women in employment in many ways? Has that actually happened? Are you satisfied that the assistance that have come forth has come forth given our gendered economy and the realities that women face in the economy?
The biggest brunt of this COVID-19 crisis, Fatima, has definitely been felt by women. Zingiswa talks to the job losses. We know that out of the 3 million jobs that have been lost in both the formal and informal sector, 2 million of those jobs, were jobs that were held by women. In a country where 40% of households are actually led by women. So it is actually a very dire situation. We also know that in terms of the crime stats, murder and sexual offenses have actually gone up, and we know that those that have actually been affected by that the most is actually women. So I think it's actually a very disheartening. And have we seen it happen? Have we seen more shifts towards women empowerment or a more deliberate and intentional stance towards women empowerment? No. And the reason for that in my mind is that we look at this women empowerment and gender agenda as an event, not as a serious intervention that needs to be taken into account to ensure that we make the shifts, going forward.
Absolutely.
And it's actually unfortunate because, as Fatima has said, we are the majority of the citizens of this country.
All right, let's take a short break. When we come back, we talk about where to from here for South African women. Stay tuned.